I wonder if it's a thief. I frowned at the sight of a pair of men's and women's shoes in the entrance. No one is supposed to be in the house, with neither me or my husband around. Yet, there were signs of someone both at the entrance and in the bathroom. The indelicate sounds coming from the bathroom made it clear someone was enjoying themselves. It's common for husbands to invite their mistresses over when their wives are away. But that's impossible. That voice, could it be? Because my husband was standing next to me, staring at the bathroom with a pale face. My name is Emily. It's been 2 years since I married Jack. Both of us work so we don't have kids yet. However, I think we are living a peaceful and harmonious life, going out or traveling on our days off. Fortunately, neither our parents nor our in-laws rush us for grandchildren. On the contrary, since both our parents live in the same city as us, we have a good relationship, often gathering for family dinners. The slightly old but splendid house we rented was recommended to us by my in-laws. The dinners happen almost once a month, mostly at our place. My mother and I cook, and we enjoy the time with my father's favorite wine and appetizers brought by my in-laws. That day, my mother came over in the morning to prepare for the dinner. But her usually bright expression seemed off. As she chopped the ingredients, she worriedly muttered things like, "Do we really need this much? Or maybe it's too much to eat," which she doesn't usually say. "Mom, what's wrong? We've prepared just about the same amount as usual, right?" When I bravely asked her that, she looked at me as if she just realized something. She laughed it off with an he. "Sorry, dear. Your father has been eating less lately, so I got worried." "Oh, really? Is Dad not feeling well somewhere?" My father was self-employed from a young age, and is still actively running his company, an entrepreneur. He's always put work first, and I barely have memories of playing with him on his days off. Even so, as a daughter, I'm worried if he's overworked himself, causing his health to deteriorate. My mother seemed hesitant to say more, but perhaps thinking it cruel to worry me needlessly, she finally opened up. "It's not like he's sick. Your father is perfectly healthy. But lately, he's been cold. He finds problems with the dinner or comments that my clothes are drab. That's awful. To say such things to Mom, he was always there supporting him at home. It's all right. Maybe Dad is just tired from starting a new venture recently." My mother insisted she was fine and wouldn't hear otherwise. The conversation drifted, and I returned to cooking without a sense of closure. Today, I plan to lay out a feast on the table, including my father's favorites like steak and fried chicken, to cheer him up for his new business venture. As for what my husband was doing, he has a penchant for cleanliness that extends to cleaning every nook and cranny of a house. Even if it's just family, he meticulously cleans the entrance and living room whenever we have guests. He even started tidying up the garden planters when my father and in-laws arrived. "Emily dear, can I have a moment?" "No, Mill." I was checking the temperature of the oil as I got ready to fry the chicken, when my Mill, with a somewhat grim expression, popped into the kitchen. She handed me a box without a word, which seemed to be a gift, and I accepted it, puzzled. To my surprise, the box bore the mark of a restaurant famous for its fried chicken. They went out of their way to make the trip to the restaurant. The savory aroma was appetizing, but it seems we've accidentally prepared the same dish. However, I simply thought to myself that I just need to fry less than planned. It's not uncommon to accidentally bring the same thing. "Well, did you go out of your way to buy this? It's a celebration, after all. But you could have mentioned you were making fried chicken. This is a bit awkward. Can we just serve the fried chicken I bought as a gift today?" "Huh. But you have Jack, so the two of you can enjoy your fried chicken, right? We're not young anymore, so too much fried food can upset our stomachs." I couldn't argue with that. As hardworking as our parents are, they're all approaching 60. The effort my mother put into preparing the fried chicken will go to waste, but it would be a shame to serve too much fried food and have leftovers. "You should have told me earlier, dear." What an inconsiderate daughter-in-law you are. I was taken aback by the words my Mill dropped as she left. However, she didn't notice my surprise and left the kitchen with the fried chicken. This was the first time she had made such a snide remark. We had never double-checked with each other on what we're bringing for dinner before. If there was the same thing, it usually turned into a joke. Moreover, all the dishes until now were sweets or meat. It was the first time she brought something pre-cooked with a close expiration date. I felt that it was odd, but thought maybe she was upset because it was a somewhat expensive dish, so I didn't dwell on it too deeply. At dinner, my father was thrilled with the expensive restaurant's fried chicken. My mother, catching my eye, seemed to understand the situation and pretended to be happy without mentioning the fried chicken we prepared. The ingredients left in the fridge were skillfully turned into a stew by my mother after we sent my in-laws and father home. Luckily, it hadn't been fried yet. Fried chicken would have been fine. You both might get tired of eating the same thing, right? Turning it into a stew would make it easier to take it home with us. My mother divided some of the stew into containers to take home. I felt guilty, but indeed, this stew she made was delicious, and my husband and I quickly finished it off. Later, I heard that despite it being such a tasty stew, my father had complained about it being an old-fashioned taste while having it with his drink. I was incredibly frustrated, but my mother just gave a wry smile, and I was left holding on to my irritation. A few weeks after that dinner, my husband, who was supposed to be on an overnight business trip, suddenly contacted me. The trip was canceled due to the other party's circumstances. He said he would be coming home as usual today. I had planned to spend some time at my parents' since he was supposed to be away for about 3 days. However, the change of plans meant contacting my mother about the schedule change. I finished shopping as usual and met up with my husband. Then we headed home together. Did I forget to turn off the lights? I thought I turned them off. As we arrived home, there was a stream of light coming from under the door. I was sure I had turned off all the lights when I left, so why was it on? What a waste of electricity, I apologized, but my husband just laughed and said, "Don't worry about it," as he inserted the key into the door, then fell silent. What's wrong? The door, it's unlocked. At my husband's grave words, I too sharply inhaled. It could be a thief. I quietly turned on my smartphone and started recording. As I nodded to signal him, my husband slowly opened the door. Whose shoes are these? At the entrance, there was a pair of men's leather shoes and a pair of women's low-heeled pumps. My husband's remark made it clear these shoes belonged to someone we didn't know. If these had been my husband's, he wouldn't be here right now. I would have thought my husband was cheating with another woman, but he's right here beside me. Naturally, we concluded that someone unknown to us was in our house. Seeing my reaction, my husband took his umbrella from the stand, ready to swing it as he moved forward. Then, we noticed the living room lights were on, and it appeared someone had scattered takeout food across the table. It was odd for a burglar. Then we heard voices. Approaching slowly, the voices seemed to come from the bathroom. The muffled voices suggested that the person was inside the bathroom. This is weird. I could understand why my husband was thoroughly creeped out. After all, the voices coming from inside were quite inappropriate. It's unsettling and infuriating to know that your home is being used for an affair without your knowledge. Wondering who in the world would do such a thing, we slowly opened the bathroom door, and the sight of discarded clothes caught our eye. Well, I couldn't help but exclaim. Because there, unmistakably, were my father's clothes. The large jacket, carefully hung on a hanger, was his favorite one he wore to our last family dinner. The casually discarded t-shirts and pants were all too familiar as well. I had just parted ways with my mother a few hours ago. She couldn't possibly be here. My father was cheating with a woman in his daughter's house. I frowned at the thought. Wondering how to explain this to my husband, I looked up to find him staring at a necklace on the sink counter, his face pale. That necklace, and the earrings next to it, I remembered seeing them recently. No way, Mom. My husband's words confirmed who was in the bath. The ones using our house for their affair were my father and my mill. Pulling my husband's arm, who seemed ready to confront them, we quietly went back to the living room. It seemed we regained a bit of calm after moving away from the echoing voices. Shouldn't we call your mom and my dad? However, my husband seemed confused as he said this. What would happen if we called my mother and his father here now? I could only foresee a crisis that might tear the family apart, but we couldn't just overlook this. The voices of enjoyment continued from the bathroom. They might not come out for another few minutes. I contacted my mother, and my husband reached out to his father right then and there. About Dad. Dad, He said he was going golfing today and left in the morning. He won't be back until tonight. Should I tell him to call you when he gets back? It seems Dad is here, with Jack's mom. I couldn't bring myself to speak of what was happening in the bathroom, but that was enough for my mother to understand. With a stern voice, she said, "I'm coming over right away," and hung up. Less than 10 minutes later, my pale-faced mother and my confused-looking Phil arrived. The voices had stopped, but they were still in the bath. We could hear the shower, but at least they weren't making as much noise for it to echo through the hallway as before. "Jack, what do you mean Mom is here? I told you, she went on a day trip with the ladies and won't be back until tonight," my Phil asked frantically, still confused as to what was going on. We had told him that my Mill was with my father, but either he was too confused or didn't want to accept it, desperately avoiding looking towards the bathroom. My husband signaled me, and I started recording on my smartphone again. Once the recording started, my husband, making no attempt to hide, rushed into the bathroom. "Hey! What are you doing in our house?" My husband forcefully opened the bathroom door, the door making a dull sound. From inside, the screams of my father and my Mill echoed, followed by the angry shouting between my father and husband. My husband, who seemed to forcefully open the door, was snarling in a low voice, full of disgust. I grabbed a bath towel and threw it into the bathroom. I didn't want to see the two of them naked. Behind me, my mother, who apparently couldn't hold back any longer, pushed past me and rushed into the bathroom. Then, pushing aside my husband and my Mill, she shouted in a rage like I had never heard before, and forcibly dragged my father out of the bath. Finally gathering his courage, my Phil followed my mother into the bathroom and dragged my Mill out. Then, the two of them hastily dressed in their discarded clothes and, without even drying their hair, sat down in the hallway. In just a matter of minutes, all of us, including myself, were out of breath from all the commotion. My mother's thin voice asked, "Why?" and that started the chain of excuses from my father and Mill. It all began with my Mill's love at first sight. My father was a business owner with impressive work connections. Always dressed impeccably, making him seem like a stylish and sophisticated man, a bit like the fashionable dads that were popular a while ago. My Mill had fallen for him right from the start. It started from the moment our families met for Jack's and my wedding preparations. My Mill took the initiative to organize dinner parties, pretending to be a gracious woman, and got closer and closer to my father. At one of those dinner parties, she finally confessed her feelings. By this point, my husband was glaring at his own mother, looking like he might throw up, but the problem also lay with my father. He was drawn to my Mill, who flirted wearing makeup and flashy clothes, compared to my mother, who was devoted to her family. However, both of them had families. My father worked alongside my mother in the same company, and when he had days off, it often coincided with my FIL's days off too. Thus, they needed a place to meet. That's where our house came into the picture. Jack and I enjoyed taking short trips and staying in hotels during long weekends. My Mill would say things like, "It's careless to leave the house empty for too long, I'll go check on it," to confirm our absence, and then would contact my father. We naively informed them whenever we were leaving the house, making it easy for them to use it. We thought we were safe since we didn't give them a spare key, but it turns out they secretly made a copy during one of the dinner parties. Moreover, they made sure to leave no trace of their presence. They brought their own food, collected all garbage, cleaned the hair from the drain after using the bath, and wiped down any water droplets in the bathroom before leaving. This time, my father contacted my Mill after learning I was supposed to be at my parents' house because of my husband's business trip. I had only told my mother about the change of plans, leading to their unfortunate encounter. If it weren't for this incident, who knows how long they would have continued deceiving us. Naturally, both were confronted with divorce and a hefty alimony demand from their spouses, as well as estrangement from Jack and me. Although my father and my Mill admitted to their actions initially, they began to claim our accusations were baseless days later. Thankfully, I had recorded everything on my smartphone, which, when presented as evidence, helped facilitate the divorce proceedings smoothly through the lawyers. Jack and I used the alimony to move into another apartment. My usually germophobic husband has developed a complete trauma of that bathroom, refusing to go near it. I, too, found it painful to continue living in a house that had been used for their rendezvous, so moving was a relief. Now, my mother, who has no feelings left towards my father, lives with us. After the divorce was finalized, my mill seemed overly pleased. She had adopted a defiant attitude halfway through, and perhaps because my father was a business owner, she readily accepted the alimony demand. She moved in with my father right after the divorce, and they got married, settling into what seemed like an easy life as an entrepreneur's wife. However, their plans fell through when his new business venture faltered, and the company's performance rapidly deteriorated. My mother just nodded as if it was to be expected. Who do you think was managing his one-man show? Indeed, it was my mother who had patiently dealt with those inside and outside the company disgruntled by my father's overbearing attitude, silently supporting the business. Much of the company's accounting and dealings with business partners were handled by my mother. Naturally, she resigned at the same time as the divorce. Agreeing to her resignation, or rather my father was in a hurry to push her out, this sudden change resulted in a lack of a proper handover of duties. As a result, he was left with employees who were dissatisfied with him, leading to a series of resignations as others followed my mother's exit, creating a shortage of staff. My father, who had always believed it was a wife's duty to support him, naturally expected my mill to take over. However, my mill had been a homemaker all her life and knew nothing about running a company, proving to be of no help. The cause of the mass resignations was soon revealed to be due to the president's divorce scandal, and clients began withdrawing from my father's company, citing poor performance. My father's company didn't last 6 months before going bankrupt. Their house and possessions were seized, and the couple, burdened with a massive debt including unpaid wages, managed to flee to a public housing complex, starting a meager life. Given his age, my father tried to find work in a company that would treat him as a president, making it impossible to secure a new job. Naturally, he remained unemployed, indulging in gambling to relieve stress. Not satisfied with just that, he blamed my mill for their misfortune, claiming, "If you hadn't seduced me, none of this would have happened," and started physically abusing her. My mill tried to support him with her part-time job, but was disappointed by his gambling addiction and constant spending of their living expenses. She couldn't stand his constant verbal abuse and one day ran away from the public housing. She ended up at my FIL's house, the home where my husband was raised. My husband and I happened to be visiting my Phil. He had become quite reclusive after the divorce, and we often checked on him. When the front door opened without the doorbell ringing, we went to see who it was and was reunited with my mill. At first, we didn't recognize her. She looked so different. It was as if a stranger, an old lady, had approached us. The once beautifully made-up mill was nowhere to be seen. The worn-out woman in front of us desperately apologized, hoping for forgiveness for everything that had happened, but I couldn't help but feel bitter. My Phil must have been deeply shocked, yet it seemed he was somewhat swayed by the return of the woman he once loved. While we were contemplating how to ask her to leave, my husband suddenly covered his mouth and collapsed to the ground, vomiting. The memories of his mother's indecent acts in the bathroom overwhelmed him, and he couldn't bear it, vomiting right there. Rushing to bring him a trash can and water, my Phil and I ended up listening to my husband's cries rejecting his biological mother. Feeling sorry for my husband, it was my Phil who stood up to resolve the situation. He firmly looked at my mill in the eyes and completely denied any possibility of reconciliation. "Leave," he said, firmly kicking her out of the house. My mill was apparently deeply affected by being so detested by her own son to the point that he vomited. She left without saying a word, staggering out of the front door. Since then, my mill has not approached my FIL's house. We haven't heard from my father or my mill since then, and it's safe to assume our ties with them have been completely severed. My husband took a few days to recover but is gradually getting back to normal. Together, we're working hard to build a warm family of our own. My mother is resilient, quickly finding work and making new friends, seemingly forgetting my father and living happily. We're hoping to get her an apartment near our home once we save a bit more money. As for my Phil, adopting a stray cat that wandered into his yard has brought some cheer to his life, much to our relief. Apparently, taking in one cat has led to more cat scattering in his yard. Recently, it has become a well-known gathering spot for cats in the neighborhood. The scandal involving my father and my mill turned into a massive ordeal for our entire family. However, for those of us who remain together, we have strengthened our bonds and are doing our best to overcome this together.